Chapter 13 is about labor relations in the public sector. In 2014, 7.2 million union members comprise 35.7% of the total public sector employment. So that's federal, state, and local. For purposes of collective bargaining, unions represent 27.5% of federal employees, 29.8% of state employees, and 41.9% of local government employees. Some national unions have branched out from their private sector membership base to represent more public sector employees, such as the United Auto Workers Union, the Service Employees International Union, and the International Association of Machinists. Free rider issue is an important factor affecting union membership among federal employees. 37 states have passed legislation allowing collective bargaining, which covers police and fire, state, education, and municipal employees. 12 states allow union recognition via check cards. 13 states permit public sector strikes. So we've talked in the past about different legislation that has come about for labor relations. And the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 applied within the civil service merit system, and it established the Federal Labor Relations Authority. And that is a general counsel that investigates and prosecutes ULPs. In the federal sector, there are some negotiable subjects. So mandatory subjects are personnel policies and procedures and working conditions. There is no requirement to bargain over permissible subjects. And there are some prohibited subjects like wages, including retirement and life and health insurance, and agency management practices. The unfair labor practices in the federal sector are similar to those that are prohibited by executive orders and the LMRA. Some of the specific ULPs are failing to cooperate in impasse resolution activities and encouraging a strike or a slowdown. Employees can file a grievance and file a claim with the statutory agency. The Homeland Security Act of 2002 established the Department of Homeland Security, and it transferred several large agencies into the DHS. It allows the president to waive employee and union rights granted under the Civil Service Reform Act, and it created the Homeland Security Labor Relations Board. The DHS has some functional lines in border and transportation security, emergency preparedness and response, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear countermeasures, and information analysis and infrastructure protection. The Postal Reorganization Act of 1970 created the U.S. Postal Service as an independent entity within the executive branch of the federal government. It provided a statutory authorization for postal unions and placed postal workers under the LMRA. It denied the postal employees the right to strike and established a fact-finding and binding interest arbitration procedure to resolve bargaining impasses. There are some similarities between the private and public sector bargaining. Public sector practitioners use a modified private sector approach to bargaining. Public sector employees join unions for the same reasons as private sector employees. And again, it could be something going on with wages, with working conditions. There are several different items that we talked about in previous chapters as to why people join unions. Bargaining is influenced by negotiators' personalities and the use of the bargaining power model to raise management's cost of disagreeing. Some differences between the private and public sector bargaining are market economy doesn't operate in the public sector, and available funding can constrain the bargaining process. Employee rights are limited to maintain discipline and harmony in continuity of service. Bargaining is decentralized throughout the departments of the public organization, and bargaining units are more difficult to define. Supervisors and managers can be unionized. Public sector unions can engage in end-run bargaining by directly appealing to a legislative body. Grievance administration must include binding arbitration as a final step. There might be a limit to the right to strike, or public employees may have no right to strike. And public employees are subject to closer scrutiny of their off-duty conduct than private employees. To sum it up, public sector employees accept a lower combined pay and benefit package than private sector employees. Public sector healthcare costs are problematic. The public sector pension funding has a shortfall, and it's significant. And dispute resolution procedures have reduced the strikes, so work can go on as expected. Chapter 14 deals with labor relations in multinational corporations and in other countries. So, a multinational corporation is a stateless corporation with a high percentage of its assets outside its home country. Think about Walmart, General Motors, ExxonMobil. There are advantages of having a multinational corporation. It can bypass protective tariffs by manufacturing locally, can locate facilities in countries with a decentralized bargaining structure, and it can gain concessions from unions by threatening to shift production to another country. There are some criticisms of the U.S. multinational corporations by labor organizations. Their foreign investments deplete capital resources needed for domestic investment. They export U.S. technology to exploit low-cost foreign labor, depriving U.S. labor of its rewards. They substitute foreign subsidiaries imports for U.S. goods, undermining U.S. wage standards. And their foreign-produced goods adversely affect the U.S. trade balance. Unions are at a disadvantage in dealing with multinational corporations because strikes don't stop the flow of financial resources, revenues, or profits to those corporations. And these corporations can whipsaw unions in using the ability of their production facilities in other countries as leverage to gain concessions. If you have a highly centralized multinational corporation, they don't delegate authority to managers, which complicates the bargaining process. And these corporations can easily hide financial resources and information from the union. So how do unions approach their multinational bargaining? The reasons they will seek a transnational bargaining is to lessen competition for low-wage areas, and they want to protect their own standards. If they want to counter the multinational corporation's power, they can use collective bargaining and also have legislation enactment. When you're talking about the European Trade Union Confederation, the union was developed as an effective political voice, and the trade unions in two countries have agreed to grant reciprocal memberships. Cross-national coordination of collective bargaining strategies is taking place. There are obstacles to unions in bargaining with multinational corporations. It's a challenge. There's differences in labor relation laws. There's an absence of central controlling authority. There's cultural differences. There is a lack of coordination of activities because people aren't all in the same room. There could be differing national priorities, and there can be employer resistance. There is little direct effect on capital investments and production allocations when we're talking about the effects of unions on multinational corporations. There is a strong indirect effect on a country's investment climate. So let's talk about NAFTA. So the North American Free Trade Agreement was an agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. that removed trade and investment barriers to create a single giant integrated market. It did trigger some job losses in the U.S. manufacturing sector, and in other countries, unions work differently. So foreign employees are much more protected from termination than in the United States. The union density is higher in many foreign countries than in the U.S. Unions are more politically involved and connected than in the U.S. And striker replacements can't be used in many foreign countries. Collective bargaining agreements are negotiated without unions in some countries. And there is a greater union participation on company boards than in the U.S. Union security is weak in many foreign countries. In Mexico, they have an exclusion clause, so closed shop clause requiring union membership before hiring and continued membership to retain employed. There's also a protection clause. So it's a contract between an employer and a passive union that protects the employer from a more demanding union. The clause allows employers to choose a union to which they negotiate. In Western Europe, unions coordinate politically with labor parties. Unionization is higher than that of the United States, but the overall union membership is declining. Exclusive representation is not common. Employers will bargain with multiple unions. And there is an emphasis on employee training and bargaining by employer associations and unions. In Great Britain, union membership is declining. Voluntary bargaining by multi-union and multi-employer is replaced by the company-level negotiations. There is no legal obligation to negotiate. And there's typically more than one union involved. In Germany, collective bargaining has become more widespread. There is a difference in West and formerly East German workers' pay and benefits that persist, but they are narrowing. In Central and Eastern Europe, which was formerly the Soviet Union, the union's major role in many countries has been to exert political pressure. Collective bargaining and bargaining subjects vary across countries and companies, and the strike as a power source for the unions is a new phenomenon. In Japan, there's some different characteristics of collective bargaining. It's decentralized. There's labor management consultation. There's a teamwork and consensus building. And they can work on lifetime employment and seniority-based wage system. In South Korea, the tripartite labor relations system is controlled by the Ministry of Labor, which formulates and administers national labor relations policies. In Australia, bargaining is industry-wide or company-wide. There are protected actions that are limited to the bargaining period, like strikes. Issues are settled by compulsory arbitration by the Australia Industrial Relations Commission. In China, there are state-controlled unions that exist as social welfare organizations that are tasked to support the state's economic program. And there are sweeping new labor laws. So the All China Federation of Trade Unions does not function so much to protect workers' rights as it does to strengthen the Chinese Communist Party's social control. Collective contracts monitor the enforcement of and implementation of labor regulations. That is a brief overview of labor relations in multinational corporations and in other countries for Chapter 14. So you'll see, just like anywhere else in a business, when you're talking about dealing with other countries, such as multinational corporations do, you have to pay attention to different cultures and different styles of doing things and different political environments. So that is it for chapters 13 and 14. Please let me know if you have any questions of anything that you're working on or anything in the chapters, and send me an email. Have a great day.